They told the world the Fyira Omegas were extinct, executed in a basement, all of them, to end the royal scent line forever. But 20 years later, a nameless scavenger walks into the Alpha King's court carrying a scent so rare it's considered a myth. He thinks he's just a con artist playing a part for a payday. He has no idea that the biological anomaly he's been hiding his entire life is actually the pulse of a fallen empire.
Welcome to another Bliss Tales video. Subscribe to my channel to keep these beautiful tales alive. New info, we have memberships and supers now where you can thank me and suggest new video ideas. Thanks for your support.
Once upon a time, there existed a city that smelled like fear. Not metaphorically, literally. In the dominion of Livra, scent is law. It's currency. It's your bloodline, your rank, your future, your cage. If you're an alpha, the world bends toward you like a plant toward sunlight. People step aside in corridors. Merchants offer better prices. Guards look the other way. Everything in your life is just easier. Not because you earned it, because your glands decided it before you were old enough to speak. And if you're an Omega, well, you learn very quickly to become invisible. The gray district of Nolis didn't have a real name anymore. People just called it the underneath. It sat below 3 elevated rail lines that never stopped for it, wedged between a chemical processing plant on one side and a scent nullification facility on the other. The nullification facility was the important one. It pumped a low-frequency chemical suppression field across the whole district. Constant, gray, humming. The kind of thing that gave you headaches after a week and nosebleeds after a month and something worse after a year. Most people moved out when the facility went up. The people who stayed had reasons to stay invisible. Anya had lived there for 11 years. He didn't count the years before that because he didn't remember them. Or he told himself he didn't. There's a difference between forgetting something and choosing not to look at it, and Anya had perfected the art of not looking. He was good at a lot of things that required a kind of disciplined numbness. Picking locks. Reading scent signatures from a distance without being obvious about it. Moving through crowds without brushing anyone. Disappearing. He was 23, or maybe 24. The woman who'd taken him in when he was 12, a broad-shouldered beta trader named Hessa, had guessed at his age from his teeth like he was a horse. She hadn't been unkind about it. Just practical. That was Hessa. Everything practical. Hessa was dead now. 3 years ago. Cardiac. The underneath didn't have good medical facilities, and by the time Anya had borrowed enough coin to get a traveling physician, there was nothing left to do. He'd held her hand through it. She'd told him something strange at the end, something that hadn't fully made sense, something about how he needed to keep taking the suppressants no matter what, how he needed to never let anyone test him, how the color gold would kill him. He'd thought it was the fever talking. He thought about it every single day. The suppressants weren't cheap. That was the thing about living a secret that big. It had a price tag, and the price tag kept going up. The standard black market Omega suppressants cost about 40 coin a week for someone with a weak secondary designation. Anya's designation wasn't weak. He'd figured that out slowly, painfully, through trial and error and 3 separate incidents where the suppressant dose that should have lasted 7 days wore off in 4. His body rejected suppression the way healthy people rejected poison. Constantly, aggressively, like something inside him was trying to get out. He bought double doses, sometimes triple. He worked scavenging jobs, courier runs, the occasional document forgery that he was genuinely talented at. He ate 1 real meal a day and told himself that was a choice, not a necessity, because the alternative was admitting how precarious everything was. He had no idea who he was. He had a scar on the back of his left hand, crescent-shaped, that he'd had for as long as he could remember. He had hair the color of something expensive, a deep amber gold that he kept cut short and covered with a hood because hair like that attracted attention, and attention was the one thing he could not afford. He had eyes that changed color in direct sunlight, going from a pale green to something that looked almost silver, and he wore tinted lenses over them in public for the same reason he kept the hood up. He had a recurring dream about a woman singing. He didn't know her face. He only ever saw her hands. She wore rings with stones the color of the ocean, and she sang something low and slow, and the dream always ended the same way, with the sound of a door being broken open and then nothing, just white, and then he'd wake up with his heart going too fast and his suppressant patch already soaking through. He didn't think about the dream. He chose not to look at it. That was the thing about Anya. He was very, very good at surviving. And survival, when you've been doing it long enough, starts to look a lot like dying slowly in a way that feels manageable. And then Dmitry walked into his life. It didn't happen dramatically. That's the thing nobody tells you about moments that change everything. They arrive looking like nothing. Anya was sitting in the back corner of a gray market trade post, eating a bowl of something warm and not thinking about what was in it, when he noticed the man across the room. Not because the man was doing anything alarming, because he wasn't doing anything at all. He was just standing near the entrance with a cup of something he wasn't drinking, and he was watching. Not the room. Anya. Most people who stared at Anya were trying to figure out his secondary designation, which was the first thing most people tried to figure out about strangers, the same way you'd assess someone's wealth by their shoes or their age by their face. The dominance hierarchy ran on it. You needed to know where you stood relative to everyone around you. It was reflex. Anya had spent years learning to read the specific micro-expression people made when they pointed their nose slightly toward him and got nothing back from the suppressants, that faint confusion, the recalibration, the dismissal as beta. This man wasn't doing that. He was just watching. The way you watch someone when you already know what they are and you're deciding what to do with that information. He was older than Anya by maybe 8 or 9 years. Dark-haired. The kind of alpha whose sense signature hit the room before he did. That particular sharp cedar and iron signature that serious alphas tended to carry. The ones who didn't bother softening themselves for social settings. His clothes were expensive but worn. Not worn the way poor people's clothes were worn. Worn the way soldiers' clothes were worn. Like they'd seen actual use. There was a scanner at his hip. Not the consumer kind. Professional grade. Military surplus, Anya guessed, with the casing modified, the read range extended. Anya knew what that scanner could do. He stood up very slowly. Set down his bowl. Didn't look at the man again. He was 3 steps from the back exit when the voice came. The patch on your left shoulder is degrading. You've got maybe 40 minutes before this whole room knows what you are. Anya stopped. He turned around because there was nothing else to do. The man was closer now. He hadn't rushed. He just moved like someone who didn't need to rush because he knew you weren't going anywhere. Up close. His eyes were a very dark gray, and he had a particular kind of stillness to him that was more unsettling than aggression would have been. Bounty hunter, Anya said. Not a question. Recruiter, the man said. There's a difference. The difference is usually the quality of the cage. Something shifted in the man's expression. Not quite a smile. The precursor to one, maybe. You're quick. That's good. I need quick. He set his untouched cup down on the nearest surface and looked at Anya the way you look at something you've been searching for a long time. Not greedily. More like relief. My name is Dmitry, and I've been looking for you for 2 years. You have the wrong person. I have the scanner results, Dmitry said very quietly. You want to know what color it turned when you walked past me? Anya's chest went very still. Gold, Dmitry said. Imperial gold. The reed signature of the Fyira line. The trade post hummed around them. Someone laughed at another table. A vendor called out a price adjustment. Everything was completely normal and Anya felt like the floor had developed a slow, invisible tilt. That's not possible, he said. Because it wasn't. Because the Fyira line was dead. Everyone knew it. It was taught in schools, recorded in the historical corrections database, acknowledged by 3 separate sovereign governments. The Fyira Omega royal line had been terminated 20 years ago in the final consolidation of the current regime. There were no survivors. There had been a ceremony. There was a monument. And yet, Dmitry said. He told Anya the plan in a safe house 2 districts over. A cramped upper room above a legitimate scent goods shop, where the ambient chemical smell of bottled alpha musk was thick enough to confuse any passing scanner. Practical choice. Anya noted it, filed it. He was always cataloging, always building the exit route before he decided whether he needed one. The Dowager King, the original king's mother, technically, a position that held more real power than the title suggested, had issued a private, off-ledger reward, significant enough to change multiple lives. The condition: produce a living member of the Fyira Omega line for verification, not for restoration. The Dowager was careful with her words, the way people are careful with words when what they mean is politically combustible. She wanted proof that the elimination order had been complete, or proof that it hadn't. The reward was offered for either outcome, which was either very fair or very suspicious depending on how cynical you were. Dmitry was, by his own description, professionally cynical. "She's not going to put you on a throne," he told Anya, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and that same unrustled energy he seemed to carry everywhere. "She wants the information. She wants to know if the current king lied about the clean sweep. That's all. And if he did lie, then she has leverage, political leverage, which is worth more to her than coin. But she's paying us in coin regardless, so." "Us," Anya said. "I'll split it. 60-40 my direction, since I did 2 years of work to get here. I was here the whole time. You found me in a trade post eating gray stew. And before that I spent 23 months following cold leads across 4 districts and bribing 6 separate informants to get to that trade post." Dmitry's expression didn't change. 60-40. Anya looked at him for a long moment. He thought about Hessa, about what she'd said, about the color gold, about the suppressant patch currently doing its slow, losing battle on his shoulder, and the fact that his next dose wasn't affordable until Thursday. "What do I actually have to do?" he said. "Present as Prince Anastasia, the lost heir. You're the right age. You have the right build, close enough. Your hair is exact." Something flickered in Dmitry's eyes when he said that, just for a second. "And your scent signature matches the archived imperial record within 0.3 variants. I have no memory of being a prince." "You don't need memory. You need posture, restraint, the particular kind of silence that reads as breeding rather than shyness. I can train you in 3 weeks." Anya almost laughed. "You can train me to be royalty in 3 weeks. I can train you to pass a surface-level scent verification and a formal court presentation. I cannot," Dmitry said with a precision that felt almost like honesty, "train you to actually be royalty. But I don't think that's going to be the problem I expected." He was looking at Anya in that way again, like relief, like something found. Anya didn't let himself think about what that meant. He chose not to look at it. "Fine," he said. 3 weeks. 65-35 my direction. Since I'm the one who has to stand in front of a Dowager King and lie through my teeth." Dmitry blinked. Then, finally, the actual smile changed his face significantly. "Done." The next 3 weeks were the strangest of Anya's life, and he had a fairly high bar for strange. Dmitry's method of teaching was nothing like what Anya had expected. There were no lessons in formal speech or etiquette manuals. Instead, Dmitry watched him, constantly, with the particular attention of someone building a map. He'd watch Anya eat, and then say something like, "You cut your food smaller than necessary. That's a survival habit. Stop it, you have enough." He'd watch Anya move through a room and then say, "You check the exits before the faces. That's a scavenger reflex. At court you check faces first, exits last. Like you're not afraid." He'd watch Anya interact with the safe house's owner, an older beta woman named Sophie who brought them food and didn't ask questions, and then say, "You thank people too specifically. You notice details about their appearance and name them. That's something someone does when they're trying to be liked, when they're afraid of being dismissed. Royalty assumes graciousness. They don't earn it." Every observation was precise. None of them were cruel. That was the disorienting part. Anya had expected a con man's training. Tricks, surface performance, muscle memory of gestures. What he got was something more invasive. Dmitry was teaching him to restructure how he moved through space. how he occupied it, how he let it receive him instead of apologizing for his presence in it. He was also, incidentally, standing very close to Anya most of the time. The alpha-omega tension in the safe house was something neither of them acknowledged directly, which was the most sophisticated form of acknowledgement. Dmitry's scent was strong. The cedar iron of it was omnipresent in the small rooms, and Anya's suppressed biology kept performing small, involuntary calculations about it that Anya kept firmly ignoring. Dmitry's control was, if anything, more remarkable. Anya could tell, through the particular quality of deliberateness in Dmitry's movements around him, that the alpha was working for that control. That it wasn't effortless. That knowledge did not help. On the 9th day, Anya had a blood memory. He didn't know to call it that yet. He thought it was a dream, except he was awake. He was standing in the small bathroom of the safe house, running cold water over his wrists the way he did when the suppression headache got bad, and then he wasn't in the bathroom anymore. He was somewhere with marble floors and high ceilings and the smell of amber and something older, something deep and rare like a forest after rain but warmer, and there was a voice, a man's voice, low and gentle, saying something in a language Anya almost recognized. Almost like hearing a word in a language you spoke fluently as a child and forgot. Then the sound of the door. The wrong door. The one that broke instead of opened. He came back to the bathroom gasping. His nose was bleeding. He cleaned it up before Dmitry saw. He chose not to look at it. But something had shifted. Some buried thing had moved. He felt it the way you feel a muscle you forgot you had after you've used it wrong, this specific ache in a specific place, somewhere behind his sternum and lower, somewhere central. He increased his suppressant dose that night and didn't sleep. On the 14th day, the suppressants stopped working. Not slowly. Not gradually. The system just quit. His body overrode them the way a river overrides a dam that's been compromised too long at the foundation. He woke up in the middle of the night with his temperature spiked and his heart going too fast and the room smelling like everything was on fire except the fire was warm and the warmth was Dmitry's sent through the thin wall separating their rooms, and his body had decided, without consulting him, that it needed to move toward that. He didn't move. He pressed his back against the headboard and breathed through his mouth and ran every mental calculation he had about why this was a terrible idea and how much he needed the money and how Hesse had told him never and how he did not know who he was and how Dmitry was a professional cynical person who was using him for a payday, and none of it made any difference to the wave of biological imperative currently doing what it wanted. With his nervous system, Dmitry came to his door. He didn't knock. He just stood outside it. Anya. His voice was very careful. I know, Anya said. Tell me what you need. Everything about that question. The specific structure of it. Tell me what you need. Not I can smell what's happening to you. Not we have a problem. Tell me what you need. Like the answer was going to determine something important. I need you please, Anya said. And his voice came out rougher than he expected. A long silence from the other side of the door. I can give you that, Dmitry said. And there, in that dark room, they mated for the rest of the night, and Anya could feel every inch of Dmitry's presence, that cedar iron warmth, like something protective around him. By morning, the worst of his heat had passed. Anya woke up and Dmitry handed him tea, and neither of them said anything about it for a very long time. Then Dmitry said, quietly, without looking at him, "There are better suppressants, pharmaceutical grade. I can source them. They're expensive. I know." He didn't mention who would be paying. He didn't need to. Something in Anya's carefully maintained resolve began to crack slowly. They didn't make it to the pharmaceutical suppressants. Not in time. It happened 3 days before the court presentation, and it happened because of a blood memory. The strongest one yet. Anya was running the formal arrival sequence in the safe house's main room, practicing the specific walk, the weight back posture, the gaze level, when the amber and rain scent hit him without warning and the room dissolved. This time he saw more. The marble floors and the high ceilings, yes, but also a face, a woman's face, the one from the dream, and he could see her now. She was beautiful and she was afraid and she was looking at him with the specific love that only has one definition, and she said something, one word, and the word was his name. Not Anya. Something older. He went down hard. Dmitry caught him before he hit the floor. That was the problem. Or the beginning of the end of the problem, depending on how you looked at it. Dmitry's arms around him, and Dmitry's scent at full range with no suppressant filter, and Anya's body making every decision simultaneously without asking. He didn't choose it, and he didn't stop it. And maybe that distinction matters, and maybe it doesn't. What he knew afterward, lying very still in the gray morning light of the safe house with Dmitry, a warm presence beside him who had the particular quality of someone who was awake but pretending he might not be, was that something had locked. Something biological and ancient and apparently irrevocable. He felt it in his sternum, that ache from before, except it wasn't an ache anymore. It was a pull, constant and oriented, like a compass needle that had found its north. He was terrified of it. He was also, for the first time in as long as he could remember, not alone inside his own skin. "Dmitry," he said. "Yeah. I don't know who I am." A pause. Long enough to feel considered. "I know. That's not. I mean, I actually don't know. I have no memory before 11. I have a scar I can't explain and dreams I don't look at and a designation I've been hiding since I was old enough to understand what it meant. I agreed to this because I needed money. I am not a prince." He stopped. "I need you to know that, before we go in there." Dmitry was quiet for a moment. Then he turned toward him, propping up on one arm, and looked at him with those dark gray eyes that had been watching him for weeks now. "What if you are?" he said, very quietly, not aggressively, like a question he actually wanted the answer to. Anya had no answer. He chose, for once, to look at that instead of away from it. The court of the usurper king was everything the underneath was not. High arches of pale stone, light that came from nowhere and everywhere. The smell of controlled dominance, synthetic and layered, the engineered sense signature of a regime that had spent 20 years making itself smell legitimate. Anya walked into it in borrowed clothes that fit him perfectly and with a posture that Dmitry had spent 3 weeks giving back to him, and he felt, with deep discomfort, that the posture wasn't borrowed. It was remembered. The Dowager King was a small woman with a large quality of stillness. She sat in a receiving chair rather than a throne, because she was technically only a guest in this court, and she watched Anya approach with eyes that gave nothing away. Beside her, the royal physician, a thin beta in formal whites, held a lineage verification apparatus. Old model. Accurate model. Dmitry was 2 steps behind Anya. He'd wanted to be closer. Anya had told him to stay back. The argument had lasted 40 seconds and ended when Anya had said, very quietly, "I need you not visible. If this goes wrong, I need you at the door." Dmitry had looked at him for a long moment with something complicated in his eyes and then stepped back. The usurper king was present but peripheral. He sat on the actual throne, across the long room, and watched with the particular attention of someone who'd built their entire security on a single lie and was now watching someone approach it with a crowbar. He was large. He was alpha in the aggressive, trained way rather than the natural way. His scent pumped and augmented by enhancement patches that Anya could pick out from across the room. He was also, Anya noted, afraid. Fear was something Anya could smell even through his degraded suppressants. Even now, the lineage verification wasn't painful. It was almost gentle. The physician pressed the apparatus to the inside of Anya's wrist, over the crescent scar, and Anya felt a slight warmth, like sunlight through glass, and then the machine made a sound it apparently hadn't made in 20 years. The court went very quiet. The Dowager King's expression didn't change. Her hands, folded in her lap, pressed together slightly harder. And then Anya's legs went out from under him. He didn't faint dramatically. He went down slowly, like something dignified collapsing, and the physician was there immediately, and Dmitry was therein for seconds flat because he had not stayed at the door after all, and Anya heard, from somewhere that felt far away, the physician saying something in a clipped, professional tone, something about a secondary reading, something about a biological marker that shouldn't be present but was, something about how this wasn't. "This isn't possible," the physician said. "He's," a pause, a recalibration. "He's carrying." The room was so quiet you could hear the light. "Only the true imperial line," the physician continued, and his voice had gone strange, reverent and horrified in the same register. Can conceive without an established bond mark. It's a documented biological trait of the Fyira omega strain. There are only 9 recorded instances in the historical record. This is the 10th. Dmitry's hand found Anya's wrist. Not to restrain, to hold. Anya looked up at the vaulted ceiling of the usurper's court and thought about Hessa. About what she'd said at the end. About how the color gold would kill him. And he understood finally what she'd meant. Not that gold would kill him. That it would cost him everything. That choosing the gold, choosing to be seen, to be known, to stop hiding, would mean the end of the life he'd built out of invisibility and discipline and carefully chosen not looking. The usurper king was standing now. The scent in the room had shifted. Sharp. Hostile. The synthetic dominance augments were cycling up. Something violent was gathering behind those augmented pheromones. Something that wore the shape of a man but was really just fear wearing a crown. Dmitry stood up between Anya and the room. The whole room. All of it. He didn't draw anything. He didn't threaten. He just stood there with that cedar iron scent going wide and full in a way Anya had never felt him deploy before. This total unaugmented alpha presence that was so different from the usurper's manufactured version that the contrast was almost funny. Almost. "We're leaving," Dmitry said. To no one in particular. To everyone. They ran. Later, Anya would find a way to reframe this as a strategic withdrawal, but in the moment it was running. Down servants' corridors that Dmitry had memorized in the 1 hour he'd had inside the court building during the setup phase. Because Dmitry prepared for every exit the way Anya checked every room, automatically as a survival reflex rather than a plan. Down and out through a service exit that smelled of linen and starch, and into a lower-level street that was just normal, just gray and ordinary and full of people going about their lives who had no idea that inside the building above them the world was rearranging itself. Dmitry pulled Anya into an alcove. Checked him. Not the way you check someone for injury. The way you check someone because the alternative, the world in which you were not able to check them, was not something you could look at directly. "Are you?" he started. "I don't know," Anya said. "The physician said." "I know what the physician said." A silence. The street sounds moved around them. Somewhere a vendor was selling something warm and fragrant. Normal. Absurdly normal. "I want to ask you something," Dmitry said. "And I need you to know that the answer doesn't change anything about what happens next. I'm getting you out of this city regardless." Anya looked at him. "Did you know?" Dmitry asked. "Any of it? Any part of it?" The honest answer was, he didn't know how to answer that. He hadn't known who he was. But he'd known something was hidden. He'd known the Suppressants were fighting something larger than standard. He'd known the scar meant something and the dreams meant something and the color gold meant something, and he had chosen, every day, for years not to look. "I knew I was hiding," he said. "I didn't know what from." Dmitry nodded. Once. Like that was exactly the right amount of truth for this moment. "The Dowager will offer protection," he said. "She has independent resources, independent from the usurper's court. She's been building toward this for 20 years. She wanted proof he lied about the clean sweep. Now she has something better than proof. She has the biological consequence of it." He paused. "But it's your choice. It doesn't have to be the Dowager. I know exits out of the Dominion entirely. You'd give up the reward. I already have something worth more than the reward." He said it very simply, like a fact he'd calculated and confirmed and was now just reporting. Anya's chest did something complicated. "Dmitry," Anya said, "the thing that locked between us. You felt it." "Yes." "Does that?" He stopped. Started again. "In your professional estimation. Does that complicate things?" The almost smile came back. The real one that changed his face. "In my professional estimation," Dmitry said. "I stopped being professional about this approximately 12 days ago. They didn't go to the Dowager. Not first. They went back to the underneath." Anya needed to think. And the only place he'd ever been able to think was the gray district with its chemical hum and its scentless air and its population of people who understood the value of not being seen. He stood in the room where he'd lived for 11 years, looking at the narrow bed and the lockbox where he kept his suppressants and the single window that looked out on the underside of a rail line, and he tried to understand what he was now. The scavenger who'd gotten very good at surviving. That was the answer he'd always had. That was the identity he'd built, the way you build a shelter from whatever materials are available. But underneath that, buried so deep it had taken biological catastrophe to surface it, there was something else. Someone who had been loved. Someone who a woman with oceanstone rings had sung to, in a high room with marble floors, before everything broke open. Someone who had been wanted by the world and then systematically told by the world that they didn't exist. Someone who had learned not to look at themselves so thoroughly that they'd almost succeeded. The empire the usurper had built on the lie of their extinction was a structure. An organized, reinforced, regime-supported structure. And Anya was what? The crack in it. The thing that shouldn't be there. The biological impossibility carrying another biological impossibility. He thought about what Dmitry had said. About the dowager wanting leverage. About political power and sent signatures and hierarchies of dominance built into law and encoded into infrastructure and taught to children before they were old enough to argue with it. He thought about the underneath. About the chemical suppression hum that kept everyone in it invisible. About why that facility existed. About who had built it and who it served and who paid for it. About the specific cruelty of a world where identity was biological and survival required hiding your biology, and the hiding cost money, and the money was hardest to get for the people who most needed to hide. He knew what he wasn't going to do. He wasn't going to be a prince. That wasn't a throne he could take, and more importantly, it wasn't one he wanted. The empire that had existed before the usurper's coup hadn't been some golden paradise. Sent hierarchy had been law then too. Alphas had been dominant then too. The Fyira Omega line had held royal power as an exception, a biological anomaly elevated to symbol, and the symbol had been useful enough to some people and threatening enough to others that eventually threatening had won. Taking that throne back would just be reinscribing the same architecture with a different face. He wasn't going to give the dowager her leverage either. Not in the way she'd designed for it. Not as a piece in someone else's political game. He thought about the suppressant facility. He thought about the people who lived around it and under it. He thought about a lot of things. And then he went and found Dmitry, who was sitting on the building's front step looking out at the gray street with the patience of someone who had decided waiting was not a problem. And he sat down next to him and said, "I want to use the dowager's resources. Not her plan. Her resources." Dmitry considered this. For what? The scent suppression mandate. It's a Dominion-level law. Regulated districts in every major city. The underneath isn't unique. He paused. The mandate was written into law during the usurper's consolidation period, specifically to neutralize secondary designation Omegas who couldn't afford proper registration. It's not health infrastructure. It's a containment system. Yes, Dmitry said, like he'd known this for a while. If we expose that, if we put the biological record in front of the Historical Review Commission, the actual unaltered commission, not the correction database version, the mandate falls. The suppression facilities lose their legal framework. They have to come down. Dmitry was looking at him now with those dark gray eyes and that not quite expression that Anya had slowly learned to read. That's not a throne, Dmitry said. No, Anya agreed. It's better. A pause. Long and full and quiet. The dowager's going to want something, Dmitry said. I'll give her the proof. That the usurper lied. That the line wasn't clean. That's what she wanted. She can use it for her political situation. That's her business. He looked at Dmitry. What I keep is the biological record. What I keep is the testimony. What I keep is the narrative that the Fyira line wasn't exterminated. It survived in the underneath, in the scentless district, in the exact place designed to make it invisible. He stopped. And that it's pregnant, and the pregnancy is impossible according to the current hierarchy's logic, which means the current hierarchy's logic is wrong, which means the hierarchy isn't biologically fixed, Dmitry said quietly. It never was. It never was, Anya agreed. Someone just needed to survive long enough to prove it. The usurper fell in the end. Not through a military coup or a dramatic confrontation or a throne room standoff where virtue triumphed over villainy. He fell the way most regimes fall when the lie they're built on becomes visible to enough people who have enough reason to be angry about it. Slowly and then all at once. Over 2 years of legal challenges, historical record corrections, public testimony, and the particular power of a biological fact that couldn't be argued with. Anya testified twice. He wore no disguise either time. He let the scent analyzers read him unfiltered, the full Fyira signature, the imperial gold that the current law had declared mythological. He was not comfortable doing it. He didn't become comfortable. But he did it because the alternative was letting the myth continue, and myths were what had kept everyone in the Grey District invisible for 20 years. The suppressant mandate was overturned in the 17th month. The Underneath's nullification facility was decommissioned 4 months after that. Anya was there when it went down. He stood in the street outside it and watched the hum stop, finally, for the first time in 11 years, and the air in the district changed, became real air, became air with scent in it and life in it and all the complicated, messy biological truth of the people who lived there. He cried. He didn't try not to. He named his son something from the blood memories. A name from a language he was slowly, painstakingly relearning. The child was born in spring with amber-gold hair and eyes that changed in sunlight. And Dmitry held him first because Anya had extracted a promise about this during month 7 in a moment of vulnerability that Dmitry had taken very seriously. They didn't build a throne. They built something slower and less dramatic and more durable. Anya thought about Hessa sometimes. About how she'd told him the color gold would kill him. He thought she'd meant it as a warning. Now he thought she'd meant it as permission. That she'd seen something in him, some quality she couldn't name, that needed exactly this, the specific destruction of everything he'd built to keep himself safe, to become what it actually was. He hadn't found a prince in himself. He'd found something messier and more specific than that. Someone who'd survived the systematic erasure of his own existence and come out the other side not wanting power over others, just the absence of power over him. That distinction was the whole thing. That was the line between domination and liberation, and it ran right through the middle of the scent hierarchy's logic and the law and the history and the myth and the man in the Grey District who'd eaten grey stew and chosen not to look. He looked now. He looked every day at all of it, at the dreams and the memories and the crescent scar and the amber-gold hair and the man who smelled like cedar and iron and who sat across from him in the mornings with a cup of something he was actually drinking now and who looked back. He looked and he didn't look away.
If you loved this video, show me some support by subscribing and clicking the notification bell.